When the villagers heard the cries that night, they didn't run toward the sound. They locked their doors because everyone in Oduja knew if screams came from the house on the hill, it meant the dog had been fed again. Long ago, in the sweltering savannah of Oduja, a village where the sun blazed as if trying to burn the land clean, there stood a house too grand for the dusty roads it sat above. With walls polished like cowrie shells and windows so clear they looked like mirrors stolen from spirits, this was the home of a woman named Nwando. Nwando wasn't just wealthy. She was the kind of rich that turned voices into whispers when she passed. Her wrappers shimmered like river water in moonlight. Her bangles clicked like royal drums. When she walked through the market, women nudged each other and bent their heads. Men averted their gaze. But Nwando's beauty was cold, the kind that froze joy instead of stirring it. At her side always was a beast, not a pet, not a companion, a shadow with teeth, a massive black dog named Oba, with a coat like midnight and eyes that glowed like embers in a dying fire. Oba didn't bark. He growled, a low thunder that made children wet themselves and grown men rethink their pride. Oba never needed a leash. Nwando only had to lift one finger, and Oba would lunge. No one knew how many bones he had broken, only that Nwando's floors were washed far too often. Inside that tall, silent house, even the air seemed afraid to move. The housemaids whispered like wind through grass, their hands trembling as they polished furniture that didn't need cleaning. If a glass was out of place, if a shoe dared lie sideways, Nwando's voice would crack like a whip, sharp, dry, final. Her laugh. It wasn't a laugh. It was a hiss, the kind of sound a snake makes before it strikes. Yet for all her power, all her beauty, all her glittering things, Nwando's womb had never known life. She had no child, no giggles in her hallway, no tiny hands tugging at her beads. The house was full of treasures but empty of joy. At night, when the world cooled and even the stars seemed to breathe softly, Nwando would sit by the tall window in her bedroom. She'd stare out at the dusty trees and clutch her stomach as though willing it to bloom. "What use is gold?" she'd whisper, "if my blood ends with me?" Her husband Ikenna was the only man who dared look her in the eye. A traveling trader with charm in his voice and sorrow in his smile, he spent more time on the road than at home. Ikenna had once loved Nwando deeply. She had been different then, full of laughter, of hunger for life. But somewhere between her rise to riches and the silencing of her soul, the woman he married became a statue carved in pride and regret. Still, he stayed. Or rather, he returned when he could, each time finding his home colder than the last. One dusty evening, as a pale, orange sun dipped behind the hills, Ikenna returned from a 2-month trade journey. He entered the house to silence so thick it clung to his skin. Only Oba's faint growl acknowledged him. In the sitting room, where every chair looked untouched and the floors gleamed like wet stone, he found Nwando sipping tea, her back straight, her face blank. He sat across from her. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Ikenna said softly, "Nwando, this house needs laughter." She didn't blink. "I'm serious," he continued. "We need a child, someone to carry our name, to fill this house with noise and life. You and I, we are two ghosts sharing a grave." Nwando narrowed her eyes. "A child?" she scoffed, her voice like iron scraping stone. "What would I do with a screaming little thing crawling through my peace?" "You're lonely," he said gently, "and I'm always on the road. A child would bring warmth to this place." "Warmth?" she barked a laugh. "Children bring filth and noise. Joy is a lie, Ikenna. You want joy? Go buy it in the market." But Ikenna was a patient man. Each day, he asked again, gently, kindly, like a farmer coaxing a mule into motion, until one morning Nwando sighed like the wind before a storm and muttered, "Fine, but don't expect me to play mother." The next day, the black car rolled out of Oduja and headed to a neighboring town's child haven, a crumbling compound shaded by baobab trees and filled with barefoot giggles and silent prayers. As they arrived, Nwando stayed near the gate, arms crossed like a judge. Ikenna walked among the children, his eyes scanning curious faces and muddy feet. In the far corner, under a jacaranda tree, sat a girl no older than 6. Her name was Ijeoma. She didn't shout or run. She sat quietly, tracing lines in the dust with a stick, her eyes deep and wide like a baby antelope's, eyes that had seen more sorrow than her size could hold. Ikenna knelt beside her. "What's your name, little one?" "Ijeoma," she said, not looking up. He smiled. "Would you like to come with us?" She nodded once. When he led her back, Nwando barely glanced at the girl. "If you want her, fine," she said coldly, "but she is yours, not mine." The ride back to the hill house was quiet. Ikenna tried to lighten the air. "She has your eyes," he said playfully. Nwando's head snapped toward him. "Don't be foolish," she spat. "Even if I bore a child, she wouldn't look so common." The car fell into an icy silence. Ijeoma stared out the window, her small hands clutched tightly in her lap. The trees blurred past, their leaves whispering secrets she could not yet hear. Her heart fluttered, half hope, half dread. When they reached the house, Ijeoma stepped out and froze. The mansion loomed above her like a sleeping beast. Its walls sparkled under the sun, but the windows looked like eyes watching her. Still, she followed Ikenna inside. Nwando did not wait to make her place clear. She towered over the little girl and spoke in a voice sharp as shattered glass. "Listen well, child. This house is not your playground. Do not touch anything. Do not enter rooms unless I say so. And that bag," she pointed to an old dust-covered satchel near her wardrobe, "never touch it. If you disobey me, you'll regret stepping foot here. Do you understand?" Ijeoma nodded, her eyes cast low. "Yes, ma," she whispered. What the girl didn't know, what even Ikenna didn't know, was that the bag held a secret. A secret, older than Ijeoma's years, a secret that would one day try to kill her. The days that followed were long and quiet. Ijeoma drifted through the house like a feather caught in a still wind. The walls were too white, too tall, the furniture too polished. Everything whispered of emptiness. The morning air in Oduja felt heavy, like it knew what was coming. Birds chirped without cheer, and the sun peeked through clouds as if afraid to rise fully. Inside the mansion on the hill, Ikenna tightened the last strap on his travel bag. The hallway echoed with silence, the kind that clung to the skin like morning dew on leaves. He stepped softly into the guest room where little Ijeoma sat, hugging her knees on the woven mat. Her eyes flicked up, wary but warm. Ikenna knelt beside her and placed a hand on her thin shoulder. "Ijeoma," he said gently, "while I'm away, be a good girl, listen to your mother. Don't make trouble, eh?" Ijeoma managed a small nod and forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yes, sir." He leaned forward and kissed her forehead. The moment lingered. Then he stood and walked out. Through the tall windows, Ijeoma watched the black car roll down the hill. With every inch it moved away, the house grew colder, not from wind, but from the presence that now filled its walls. Nwando stood in the hallway, her arms crossed, her eyes sharp as arrowheads. "Remember what I told you," she said without moving closer. Her voice was colder than the Harmattan dew. "Yes, ma," Ijeoma replied softly, shrinking like a flower. At dusk, the door slammed. And then began the quiet days, days that bled into each other like rain across parchment. Ijeoma kept her head low, her steps quiet, her hands folded. She did not speak unless spoken to. The housemaids avoided her like smoke, glancing quickly, then looking away as if she were cursed. Each night, Ijeoma sat alone, holding the worn photo of her father against her chest. She imagined his arms around her, his laughter filling the silence. But the photo could not answer her whispered questions. "Why did you leave me here, Papa? Why is she so angry? Why do I feel invisible?" One slow afternoon, the sun hung heavy in the sky like a tired drum, and Ijeoma sat alone in her room again. The air was still, but something tugged at her attention. In the far corner, half swallowed by shadow, sat the old handbag Nwando had warned her about. It hadn't moved. It hadn't spoken. But somehow, it felt alive. Her eyes locked onto it. It looked wrong in a room so clean, dusty, frayed, bulging slightly. like it had been forgotten on purpose, like it was hiding something. Curiosity crept through her like an itch behind the eyes. Why had Nwando warned her so harshly? What could be inside? At first, she turned her face away, but each time her eyes drifted back, and soon the question in her chest grew louder than her fear. Slowly, Ijoma rose. Her feet padded across the floor like whispers. She checked the hallway, empty. Her small fingers trembled as she reached for the zipper. It groaned open, and the smell hit her like a slap. Rotting meat, rust, wet wood, decay. She gagged, but her hands didn't stop. Inside lay blood-soaked rags, brittle bones that looked too small to be animal, strange charms knotted with feathers and hair, and small glass bottles filled with black, thick liquid that bubbled even without movement. She froze. Her heart thudded like a drum at a funeral. The bag was a shrine, a grave, a curse. She screamed. The sound ripped through the house like a cracked drum. Servants gasped, dishes fell, windows trembled. And then, thunder, footsteps, fast, heavy. The door flew open. Nwando stood there, her face twisted into something inhuman. Rage burned in her eyes. Her mouth was a blade. "What are you doing?" she roared. Ijoma stumbled backward, arms shielding her face. I didn't mean to, I was just curious." "Curiosity?" Nwando hissed, stepping forward. "You dare touch what's not yours?" Her hand snatched Ijoma's arm. The grip was iron. Ijoma cried out. "Oba!" Nwando screamed. From the hallway, claws scraped tile. A deep growl rolled, in like a rising storm. The black beast entered. His eyes gleamed, his tail was still. "Chase her," Nwando commanded. Oba lunged. Ijoma ran. She darted down the hallway, heart in her throat. The air tore past her ears. Behind her, snarling, and claws thundered like war drums. She reached the stairs, slipped, fell. Oba caught up. Teeth and claws sank in. Ijoma screamed. A high, piercing sound that echoed into every corner of the cursed mansion. Her small body crashed onto the tiles. Blood soaked her wrapper. She lay shaking, too weak to crawl. And then, an engine. A car. A door slammed. Ikenna. He had returned early. He entered through the main gate, and the sight froze his soul. There in the open hall lay Ijoma, covered in blood, skin torn, breath shallow. Oba stood over her, tail wagging, tongue dripping. "No!" Ikenna roared. He ran to her, scooped her into his arms. Her body was limp. Her blood stained his clothes. "What happened?" he shouted at Nwando, who now stood frozen in the hallway. Her mouth opened. Lies gathered behind her teeth. They were playing," she stammered. "I was getting dressed. I heard the scream. When I came out, this had happened." Ikenna stared at her, but he had no time to question. "Driver, start the car. We're going to the hospital, now." The drive was a blur of potholes and prayers. Ikenna cradled Ijoma as if holding her soul together. Her breath came in short gasps. Blood soaked into the seat cushions. Her tiny fingers trembled, clutching the air. "Hold on," he whispered. "Please, child, hold on." The hospital gates swung open. Nurses and doctors rushed out. A stretcher appeared like magic. They laid her down gently. Her body looked smaller under the harsh lights, fragile like a clay pot ready to crack. Ikenna followed, face dripping with sweat, heart pounding like sacred drums. Nwando entered moments later, her steps hesitant, her face drained. She clutched her handbag tightly. Ikenna turned to her, eyes blazing. "What happened?" he barked. Nwando's lips trembled. "They were just playing. I didn't know." His fists clenched, but he said no more. Ijoma needed saving. In the emergency room, a doctor examined her. His face grew grave. "She's lost a lot of blood," he said. "We need to transfuse her immediately." "Use mine," Ikenna said. The doctor nodded. A test was done. He returned moments later, shaking his head. "Your blood doesn't match." Ikenna's chest tightened. "Then what?" "We'll test the mother." The room froze. Nwando's hands began to shake. Her lips parted in protest, but she said nothing. A nurse drew her blood. The sample vanished down the hallway. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. Ikenna paced. Nurses moved like shadows. Ijoma lay still, her chest rising faintly. Then, footsteps. The doctor returned. "It's a perfect match," he said. "Her mother's blood matches exactly." Nwando's eyes widened. Ikenna turned to her, stunned. "What is he talking about?" he asked. The doctor looked between them. "Is she not your biological child?" "No," Nwando started. "No, she's not. She's not mine." But her voice cracked. Ikenna stepped closer. "Nwando, what have you done?" She backed away. The words were climbing now, secrets clawing their way from her throat, truths too heavy to bury anymore. The weight of it all finally broke her, and her knees gave in. For the first time in years, the mighty Nwando trembled. Her lips shook. Her breath stuttered like a broken drumbeat. Her knees gave way beneath her, and she sank slowly to the hospital floor, hands limp at her sides. Her voice, once sharp enough to pierce bone, came out like a breeze struggling through dry reeds. "Ikenna," she whispered, "there's something I must confess." Ikenna knelt beside her, his brows drawn in pain and disbelief. The woman before him looked nothing like the iron-hearted wife he knew. "What is it, Nwando?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "Tell me everything." No more shadows. Her eyes spilled. Tears raced down her cheeks. Her heart pounded like thunder trapped in a drum. And so she began to speak. "10 years ago," she said, her voice splintering. "Before I met you, I was married to a man named Akini. We were poor, Ikenna, poor like the dust beneath sandals. We lived in a small compound in a forgotten corner of Umuru." She paused, her body racked by a sob. "We had a child, a daughter named Ndali. She was my light, my joy. Even when there was no yam in the pot, no fire in the hearth, that child gave me reason to wake." Ikenna's eyes widened. "You had a child, and you never told me?" Nwando nodded, the weight of silence pressing harder on her chest. "One night, a fire consumed everything. Our hut, Akine's small cobbler's shed, even our clothes. We were left with ash and shame. Akene tried to rebuild, but there was no food, no money, not even milk for Ndali. He begged, I wept. But poverty laughed in our faces." She covered her face with trembling hands. "I left. I walked away from them both. I told myself I'd return when I had something to offer, when I was someone. But I never went back. I rose to riches, married you, built this palace on a hill, but I left my child behind in the ruins of my old life." Ikenna's fists clenched. "You abandoned her." Nwando wept harder. "I thought it was mercy. I thought she'd be better off without me. And now," Ikenna's voice cracked, "that same child has returned to your arms and you've treated her like a curse." Nwando looked up, her eyes wide in realization. "I didn't know Ikenna. I didn't recognize her. She was just a quiet orphan. To me." Ikenna's voice turned ice-cold. "The matron told me her name was Ndali. She said her father died when she was 5. "How did you not see it?" he snapped. Nwando gasped, the guilt crashing onto her like a wave of fire. She couldn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth now stood between them, sharp as a spear and just as deadly. The doctor re-entered quietly, his presence like mist on a pond. "She'll survive," he said softly. "She's strong. With rest and care, she will heal." Ikenna nodded slowly, his chest rising and falling like the wind over broken earth. He didn't look at Nwando. "That's all that matters, Mike, for now." Nwando remained on the cold floor, arms limp, spirit crushed. In the hospital room, little Ndali, the child once known as Ijoma, lay wrapped in white gauze. Her tiny chest rose gently, her eyes flickered beneath closed lids. A machine beeped softly beside her. Each sound was a lifeline, a song of survival. She stirred, her small fingers curled around something tight, a picture. Ikenna stepped closer. "Ndali, what are you holding?" he asked softly. Her eyes fluttered open. Her voice was thin as thread. "Papa," she whispered. After a moment, Ikenna gently pried the photo from her fragile grip. His heart stopped. It was a worn wedding photo. In it, a young Nwando, simpler, smiling, stood beside a man he didn't know. That man could only be Ekene, her late husband. Ikenna looked at the image, then at Ndali. The puzzle was whole. Behind him, Nwando gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth as memory crashed over her. The village, the flames, the cries, the tiny hand she let go of in the dark. That's my wedding photo," she said, voice hollow. Ikenna didn't speak. His silence struck harder than words ever could. He gathered Ndali into his arms, kissing her forehead with a promise. "You are safe now. I'll never let harm touch you again." Days later, the hospital released Ndali. They returned to the house on the hill, but something had changed. The air was thick with unease. The maids greeted them with downcast eyes, their movements stiff. Fear hung like smoke in every hallway. Ikenna noticed it all. They feared Nwando, but for reasons deeper than cruelty. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He carried Ndali to her room and laid her gently on the bed. She smiled faintly. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Then, a smell. A strange, bitter scent drifted through the air like spoiled palm oil. Ikenna followed it down a corridor he rarely entered. A door stood half open. Inside, the room was nightmare-born. On the floor lay severed hands, bloodied clothes, and ritual, charms shaped like broken dreams. The walls were stained with old screams. Ikenna's stomach turned, his knees weakened. Behind him, one of the maids screamed and ran. Another dropped her tray and fled. Panic rippled through the mansion like a stampede. Ikenna stood frozen. Then rage. He stormed to the sitting room where Nwando sat as though nothing had happened. He shouted her name. She flinched. "What is that room?" he demanded. "What have you been doing?" Nwando's mouth moved, but her voice barely came. I couldn't stop it. When they disobeyed me, I punished them. I hurt them." She paused. "I cut their hands. I fed them to Oba." Ikenna staggered back as if struck. "You tortured them? You turned that dog into a killer?" Nwando broke down. "I was angry, bitter. The ghosts of my past, they haunted me, and I took it out on the world." Ikenna turned away in disgust. He pulled out his phone. "There's a monster in my house," he told the police. "Come, now." When the officers arrived, Nwando didn't fight. She walked with her head lowered, wrists bound. Oba, muzzled and chained, was led away, no longer feared, just pitied. The next morning, Ikenna sold the house. The mansion that once towered over Oduja, casting long shadows, stood empty, a monument to pain, greed, and buried secrets. He and Ndali moved far away, to a quiet town where the sun didn't feel like judgment, where smiles were given freely and the walls held laughter instead of cries. There Ikenna built a new home, not big, not shining, but filled with light. Soon he married again, a kind, soft-spoken woman named Chidima, whose smile reminded him of sunlit water. She embraced Ndali as her own daughter, showering her with warmth and gentle love. In time, Chidima gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl, and joy returned. Ndali, once wounded, once broken, blossomed. Her eyes regained their sparkle. Her laughter returned. Her scars faded, inside and out. Years later, as a strong, young woman, she kissed her new siblings goodbye, hugged Chidima tightly, and thanked Ikenna for never giving up on her. Then she left to chase her dreams in the city, to build a life not from ashes but from hope. Years later, the people of Oduja saw a figure return to their village, bent, broken, barely recognizable. The sun beat down on her thin frame, but she no longer walked with the pride of a woman whose clothes once glittered like river gold. Her wrapper hung loose on her bones. Her hair had turned to brittle threads of grey. Her once smooth face was now hollow, the skin drawn tightly over. Sorrow and time. It was Nwando, the same woman whose mansion cast a shadow over the entire town, the one who had ruled with fear, the one whose dog once silenced laughter, and whose name was whispered like a curse. She had returned, but she was not the same. She didn't come in a car. She didn't wear bangles. She didn't hold her head high. She walked, with cracked heels, blistered palms and a small tin cup clutched in trembling hands. She begged, at market squares, on street corners, outside shrines. "Please," she murmured. "Anything. A piece of yam, a coin, water." The townspeople watched in silence, and then came the whispers, sharp as thorns. "That's Nwando," they muttered behind calabashes and market stalls, "the woman who let pride devour her heart, the one who turned her home into a grave. The mother who hurt her own child." The words struck her like stones, but she did not defend herself. She had no strength left for lies. Each night she slept under a tree by the village well, her back pressed against the roots, her cup beside her, and her thoughts thick as fog. She remembered the rooms filled with gold, the perfume that masked the scent of rot, the hiss of her voice, the sound of Oba's claws, and most of all the eyes of her daughter filled with silent pain. Ndali, her child, her blood. The little girl she had left in a burning world, only to hurt again years later. She asked around. She begged to know. "Where is Ndali?" she pleaded with the midwife. "Have you seen my child?" She asked the fisherman. Is she safe?" But every reply was the same. "She's gone, left long ago, said she would never return." The weight of those words crushed Nwando's shoulders until she hunched like a tree weathered by storms. One morning, as the sun rose gentle and gold over the village rooftops, Nwando sat quietly beside the road. Children ran past her without fear. Market women stepped over her. No one bowed, no one greeted. She watched it all, her eyes full of memories and regrets. She whispered to herself, "I had everything and I ruined it all." In her final days, the villagers said she spoke to the wind, that she stared at the clouds, asking if they had seen a girl with eyes like antelope and a heart soft as morning rain. She died with her back against the same well she had once passed without a glance. No one claimed her body, no one lit a fire in her name, but the wind remembered, and so did the earth. And somewhere far away, in a city filled with life, a woman named Ndali looked up at the sky, and though she did not know why, she felt a strange peace settle in her chest. The past may be buried, but it always finds its way back through the cracks. Power cannot buy forgiveness, but love, when nurtured, can still bloom from the broken soil. If you were moved by this story, leave a comment sharing what it taught you. Like the video. Subscribe for more African tales, stories that carry not just entertainment, but wisdom passed through generations. Thank you for listening.